Should you watch Deep Blue Sea 2? Should anyone? Welcome to Rotted, review of the day, and today we're going to be taking a look at Deep Blue Sea 2. As always, this is a spoiler-free review, and we're going to be having a deep dive discussion video also coming out this day. You can click the link in the description to get to there if you want. So, Deep Blue Sea 2. The original came out in 1999, and now 19 years later we get the sequel that nobody that I know of asked for, but sometimes they just gotta make them. I mean, it's ultimately not a huge surprise. The first one had a budget of about $60 million, and it pulled in about $161 million all told. So, I mean, it did a respectable profit, and I was honestly, my biggest surprise is that we haven't seen a sequel up until this point. But the problem that I have with this one is not so much the fact that it's a sequel, not even so much the fact that it's a low budget cash grab, but just the nature of how they approached it as a sequel, using the name of the original franchise and slapping a 2 on the end. I got to be honest, watching it, it doesn't feel like it belongs with the franchise, and I'll go into why with as little spoilers as possible as we go into the scoring system, which, as always, is 5 different categories, each category worth up to 20 points for a possible total score of 100 points. And the first category is the plot slash subtext. This movie has no subtext. It is strictly plot, and not a great one. Not that I have any huge problems with the plot in general. If this was a movie that was just released standalone, and pretending Deep Blue Sea had never happened, I would probably be grading it a fair bit higher. How it handled the characters, how it handled the interactions, and the situational, goings-ons. It could have been done a whole lot better, as evidenced in 1999. But my main problem with this is that Deep Blue Sea does exist, and this has a 2 tacked onto it, and from what I can tell, it's like 19 years later, they decided, let's go ahead and make some minor tweaks, some very small changes, throw about 10% of the original budget at it, and then call it a sequel. But really, it's almost like a cheap direct-to-video remake. It follows the same basic plot line. It has a lot of the same basic characters, them trying to make medical discoveries, so they experiment on sharks. It doesn't go as planned. The experiments make the sharks overwhelmingly difficult to manage and, exceedingly smart, and now they turn on the people that have experimented on them. The head of the corporation is a bald black guy with a goatee, and, with, grander than vision dreams. The lead protagonist is attractive female, who in this case is really not shy of wearing her wetsuit zipper right down to here for no particular reason. It was watching the 2 movies, it really was kind of a good example of the difference between good schlock in 1999 and bad schlock in 2018. That would be my biggest complaint with the plot, is that it just had nothing new to contribute. If you're going to have a sequel, you need to have some new elements. You need to take, even if it's not the existing characters, because for whatever reason, budgetary, what have you, you can't bring them back. Bring something new to the table in the context of the story that you have already made, and expand on it, as opposed to just redoing it. If you're going to make a remake, make it a remake. So I gave the plot 4 points out of a possible 20. It was a bit of a stinker. The intent. Now this is where this movie is a grand example of why I made this intent category. Horror films, I think in general, are very difficult to score and to grade up against, its cinematic brethren. It is why, you hardly ever see horror films in, major award ceremonies aside from their own niche, you know, their awards. And I wanted to make one that make a scoring category that would give films like this and films that are purposefully trying for something, even if they fail in every other way, an opportunity to present itself honestly, say this is what we're going to be trying to do, and whether or not they accomplish it. And I also think that it's probably once there's some discussion involved. This is probably the category that I'm going to get railed on the most in comments and in discussions, is in order to judge how successful I think the intent is, first I have to kind of interpret what the intent of the movie is, and it could be I'm entirely wrong about that. But what I have to do is kind of take the face value presentation, the marketing campaign, the posters, the feel of the film, and do my best to come up with what are they trying to accomplish. And if they are presenting themselves disingenuously, then I may get that wrong. Whether the fault lies with me or them on that front is another matter for discussion and so forth. But moving on, what I think the intent of this movie was a cash grab. I think that it was an opportunity that they had this franchise. They never made a sequel out of it. They never turned it into a franchise, and somebody owned the rights to it, and they wanted to move forward. They said, okay, enough time has passed, and we can toss some, a pittance at it, tack a 2 to the title, and toss it to people that'll be willing to work cheap, and recoup some opportunistic money on it. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I mean, it exists in the world of horror films, and honestly, I mean, let's be perfectly honest here. It's why we have 3 or 4 direct-to-sequel or direct-to-video sequels for Beauty and the Beast and Little Mermaid and all the other Disney classics. It's why we have Lady and the Tramp 2. It exists and it works, and it doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. Sometimes they pull out some good hidden gems. And some of my favorite horror films are low-budget, direct-to-video, attempts at cash grabs that just turned out to be just super fun. So I don't have a problem with that. But that is my interpretation of what the intent was. It was honestly difficult to see it in any other way. But in that regard, I thought that they actually succeeded fairly well. So I mean, I gave this 16 out of 20 points on intent. I'm not going to argue whether or not that the intent of it being a cash grab is a good or bad thing. It just is, and I think that they actually did a fairly decent job with it under that circumstance. Acting. Whether or not it was the writing or the acting itself. Sometimes actors are only as good as the material they have to work with. Sometimes the director insists on, a wooden performance. If they, take the character, make it their own and so forth, and they, do that in 5 takes, the director may choose the 6th one where it's just off. Regardless, what was put to print was pretty darn bad. The dialogue was god-awful horrible throughout the entire movie. I gave the acting a 7 here. I think that there were some portions of it that did pull off what they could. I saw a lot of glimmers of, this person knows that they're the somewhat of the snippy, too smart for their own good comic relief. This person knows that they are the blonde, busty protagonist that, the entire film, the audience's eyes are never up here. And I think that they do what they can with that in the situation they're provided, but I can't really grade it anywhere, above average or even average. I got to go below average, but giving them as much credit as possible. The effects I thought were actually fairly decent. There were moments where there was CG that took me totally out of it because it was just so sci-fi original movie kind of quality that it does break the immersion. But I did give it an 11. It was, I would say, average. The moments that worked well. And just every once in a while you would come across a scene, and I will go into it a little bit more in the deep dive discussion because there was a plot element that did differ from the original, and it was fun and cute, but it is also one of the things that marked the effects down. Fear quotient, big old goose egg on this one. No fear quotient whatsoever. Not scary in the slightest. No jump scares. No anything like that. I don't necessarily think that was what the intention was, but you know what? I kind of want to go over that in the deep dive discussion too, is the fear quotient category of the grading system. What if a horror movie isn't trying to be scary? Should I be marking it down so hard on the fear quotient? I think so. I gave a lot of thought to the scoring system. I ran through a lot of horror movies that I had seen and graded them to see how they would stack up with one another in the context of these categories, and I stand by it, and I want to discuss why in the deep dive. So look for that. But as it stands, without an explanation, without going into it too hard, there was absolutely nothing scary about this movie, so I got to give it 0 on it. Which brings us for a total of 38 out of 100 possible points. This was, I think that the biggest crime for this one was it didn't know where it wanted to land. It wasn't at all a serious sequel movie. It also wasn't a tongue-in-cheek, fun, sci-fi original Croctopus versus Megalodon Mecha 2. It didn't know where it wanted to land in this, and it landed somewhere in the middle, which I think was just ineffective. I really can't recommend this unless it's like a very specific group of people. If you liked the original, I would not recommend this one. If you like B-movie schlock, then I think it's probably worth a whirl. It is, I think, the best situation to watch this is with friends, over several bowls of shared popcorn that are willing to, throw the popcorn at the screen and inject their own dialogue and just have some fun with the experience of watching it. Other than that, I really can't recommend it. Deep Blue Sea 2, meh. So, that should about do it for this one. We'll be, like I said, going over a lot more in the deep dive discussion. So, next time you want to watch a horror movie, first make sure that it's good and rotted.